So where we going? Tell me something. Talk to me.
Brown's house is that way.
Okay.
Here, about maybe another half-mile up the road from where we turned. And the road to his mill ran by his house and down this long ridge here.
Okay.
Until it gets to what we call the East Fork of Sandy Creek. And this is not Sandy Creek out to our right here. This is actually a tributary. And we're going to the mill dam site. Carolyn and I went through so many deeds during the chain of title that we found several that laid out the parameters for what they call the mill pond parcel. And Carolyn took them to the coordinates to the tax assessor's office, and they drew it off for us as to where it was. So between the meets and bounds and the deeds and the pins here, we've got a pretty good idea of where the mill and the mill pond was. You see these large rocks and everything?
Yes.
Here. This is one thing we haven't figured out yet. There's a ditch here. When I first saw it, I thought it was a trench. But come up here. See it taking off up through there, and it hugs the side of this ridge all the way back up to Walker Moody's house there, almost.
It looks like a race.
Yeah, that was our thought. But
it doesn't. I don't know how they would have got the water. Which way is that creek going? To the left?
It's going to the west.
So it would have had to been. This looks too high.
Yeah. Well, to mess your mind up even further, they found the drive shaft to the mill on top of the hill.
Up there?
Yeah. On that second point. We found so far. Let me double check that this way. We found so far. Let me double check that this way. We're here at the site of the mill dam for Brown's Mill, a few miles south of Newnan. This was the site of a cavalry battle during July of 1864 that pitted about maybe 2,500 Yankee cavalrymen under Edward McCook against roughly, initially it started out about 750 or so of Joe Wheeler's Confederate troopers. Now you may ask, how did the Yankees get this far below Atlanta? Well, it all started really when the campaign began, because General Sherman's orders from Ulysses S. Grant was to move into Georgia, to break up Joe Johnston's army, and to get into the interior as far as you can. Well, it worked, and yet it didn't. Sherman got 100 miles south of Chattanooga to the very outskirts of Atlanta, But during all that combat during May and June and early July of '64, he hadn't been able to destroy Joe Johnston's army. And so that last week in July witnessed a shift in Sherman's tactics. Instead of continuing to trying to destroy Joe Johnston's army, which was now holed up in the fortifications that ringed the city of Atlanta, he decided to shift his emphasis to his cavalry and send them out to cut the railroads that fed and supplied the Confederate army defending the city. And this is why he sent out McCook and General George Stoneman on a two-pronged raid that was designed to swing around the east side and the west side of Atlanta simultaneously. And the idea was they would rendezvous at Lovejoy Station about 29 miles south of Atlanta and thoroughly wreck the Macon and the Western Railroad, which by this time in the campaign was really the Confederate Army's sole source of supply. McCook got to Lovejoy Station, but Stoneman wasn't there. And so McCook was at a loss for what to do next, and so he decided to retrace his steps, never giving a thought to the fact that whoever was chasing him before would be right in front of him now. And as they came out of Lovejoy, there was a big skirmish there where the Panhandle Road diverts to the southwest now. And this forced McCook off the main road. And he spent the night toiling along the lower Fayetteville Road until he got to Noonan about 8 o'clock in the morning on July the 30th. And the idea was to rush through Noonan and get to the Chattahoochee River to Moore's Bridge, which was only 9 miles away. Once they got across the bridge, they could burn it and they would be safe on the far side of the river. The only problem was other Yankee cavalry had burned Moore's Bridge about 3 weeks earlier, but they weren't talking to each other, obviously. But when McCook got to Noonan, there was a trainload of dismounted Confederate cavalry reinforcements that had been sent to Atlanta from Alabama. And the break that McCook had caused in the track at Palmetto on July the 28th had caused the train to stop. And the men on this train were in the perfect position to block McCook as he tried to force his way through the town. So unable to do that, McCook detoured to the south toward where we are now. And he would have come by Robert Y. Brown's house. Robert Y. Brown owned Brown's Mill and had since 1838. But the Yankee column would have come down this hill, down this road, and they would have crossed this little shallow ford here to our right, and then gone up the hill and cut their way through the fields and hills on the north side of the East Fork of Sandy Creek here until they got to what is now Millard Farmer Road. Once they got to Millard Farmer, they took a left turn, headed west, and again they're trying to get to the Chattahoochee, a ford, a ferry, a bridge, anything that will get them to the far bank in safety. But General Wheeler had been hot on McCook's trail all during the night with his 750 Confederate cavalrymen, and he sent a column of about 200 Tennesseans under Henry Ashby to intercept the head of McCook's column, which they did up here at the site where the UDC monument stands today opposite of Haynes Recycling. That stopped McCook's forward progress. At the same time, Wheeler had sent a second column under the famed Texan Brigadier General Saul Ross, who was later governor of Texas. He came on a secondary road that tapped into the Millard Farmer Road, while Wheeler and his bunch came through what is now the county waterworks property over here on Waterworks Road. So McCook's column, strung out for 2 or 3 miles along the Millard Farmer Road, found itself being hit in the front and the flank and the rear simultaneously. And these men, you've got to understand, they had been in the saddle almost constantly for 3 days and 4 nights. They had been subsisting on green corn and watermelon, and they were about at the limits of their endurance. Of course, Wheeler's Confederates were in the same boat, but they put up a better front. They attacked vigorously, as Wheeler was prone to do, and they pushed the Yankees in a semicircle back beyond the mill here to a long ridge just this side of the Old Corinth Road. McCook set up his artillery there. His troops rallied around these 2 guns, and they made a last stand until about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when McCook became convinced that he was absolutely surrounded. And he called his senior officers together in a council of war and said, "Listen, guys, we're surrounded. There's no alternative. We're going to have to give up." And Colonel Jim P. Brownlow, the P stood for Patton, by the way, looked at McCook and said, "You can surrender, be damned. I'm going out of here with my regiment." And the other regimental commanders chimed in with him, and McCook backed off and says, "If y'all think you can get out, you're welcome to try." And so the big breakout began, and the Yankees left the battlefield in 3 columns. One went directly to the west, and they had left very early in the battle after only about an hour and a half of combat. Brownlow led another column to the northwest, and they crossed the river south of the McIntosh Reserve on the Chattahoochee River. But the biggest bunch, about 1,200 guys, led McCook directly to the south here. They crossed this branch of Sandy Creek and bore to the west until they ran into the old Corinth Road, or what was called the LaGrange Road in those days. And they found a slave who gave them directions on how to get to the river. And they rode from about 5 p.m. till 11 o'clock that night till they got to Philpotts Ferry on the Chattahoochee River. Philpotts Ferry, the landing is now underwater as part of the West Point Reservoir. But the Yankees got to the river. They were counting on the ferry boat being there to ferry them across because the river was over 100 yards wide there. And remember, these guys have been in the saddle for 3 days and 4 nights. They're exhausted. They've just fought a major battle. But when they get there, the ferry boat's gone. But the slaves tell them that Philpott has poled the ferry boat up the stream to the mouth of New River and sunk it. And so during the night, the Yankees went up, they bailed out the ferry, got it operating, floated it down to the landing, and started shuttling men and horses across. And they weren't quite through yet when Wheeler caught up with them about daylight the next morning. And there was a mad scramble to get across the river. Wheeler captured all kinds of horses and mules, and depending upon who you believe, anywhere from 40 to 60 Yankees. But that effectively ended this cavalry raid. McCook was able to escape way over into Alabama. He made a big loop through Redowie and Roanoke before finally recrossing the state line up around Buckhannon, and he went back through Draketown, just north of Villarica, and didn't stop till he got to Marietta. And there he sent a report to Sherman saying that he regarded the raid as a great success, even though he had lost upwards of 1,200 men, more than a third of his command. And the upshot of this raid was the Confederate victory here at Brown's Mill, coupled with Alfred Iverson's victory near Macon at the Battle of Sunshine Church, where he destroyed George Stoneman's column, wrecked the Yankee cavalry. And it convinced Sherman that cavalry would not work long enough or hard enough to effectively destroy a railroad. And he was obviously short on men and horses by this time, so he changed his tactics yet again. He resorted to a siege, those famous scenes you've seen out of Gone with the Wind, with the artillery bombarding the city and Scarlet fleeing in panic, that sort of thing. That's when that began, and it was because Sherman's cavalry couldn't cut these railroads, and because of the defeat they suffered at Sunshine Church and here at Brown's Mill.